A warm welcome from Zurich Insurance. Please take note of the following tips to ensure a smooth experience during this webinar. All attendees are in listen-only mode. To ask questions during this webinar, please use the Q&A function to the right-hand side of your screen. Please note that this webinar may be recorded. For optimal bandwidth, we recommend closing other applications on your laptop or mobile device. Where possible, try to minimise the usage of the internet by others in your household. But most importantly, sit back, relax, and enjoy the webinar.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar on safeguarding through COVID-19 and beyond. It's great to have so many of you joining us this morning. My name is Claire and I'm the Events Manager at NCVO. NCVO is the membership body for charities in England, connecting, representing and supporting over 15,000 members. We're delighted to be bringing this webinar to you in partnership with Zurich Insurance, one of our trusted suppliers. We'll be recording the webinar today, and the recording, along with the slides and other relevant resources, will be sent to you after. There will be time for Q&A during the final 15 minutes, so please submit your safeguarding questions and we will do our best to answer them. Today's webinar will focus specifically on safeguarding your staff rather than health and safety considerations. If you'd like further guidance on health and safety, please see NCVO's guidance at knowhow.ncvo.org.uk/coronavirus and look at the section called Returning to Work Safely. There's also a recording of our webinar on the easing of lockdown, legal and practical considerations for returning to work at the bottom of that page. Before we get started, I'd just like to highlight NCVO's free safeguarding resources, which you can access at knowhow.ncvo.org.uk/safeguarding. We're also running half-day online safeguarding training, and you can find out more at booking.ncvo.org.uk/training. And so, without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Marie Williams, Safeguarding Risk Consultant at Zurich Insurance, who will be leading the webinar today. Over to you, Marie.
Okay, thank you, Claire, for that lovely introduction. So, safeguarding through COVID-19 and beyond, not an easy subject. We're going to be looking at the risks that you should be thinking about in order to how you can best support and protect your staff and their families. So before I start, for simplicity's sake, when I say staff, I actually mean everybody who works for your organisation. So everybody who helps you to function, helps you to run. So obviously this will be paid members of staff, people that are employed, but it will also be volunteers, volunteers that are so vital to your service. And when it comes to safeguarding, the responsibilities are actually universal, regardless of what your role is, whether you're paid, you're a volunteer, the responsibilities are the same. So I think it's important just to be inclusive here. So, what do we talk about? Safeguarding through COVID-19. Now, I know lockdown in the context of what we've all been through over the past 6 months or so does look very different today. If we think back to March, a lot of the restrictions that we've been used to have been lifted. So you may be thinking that a webinar on safeguarding through COVID-19 is a bit like closing the stable door after the horse has bolted. But is it? Is it really? We all know that living with COVID-19 is unprecedented. How long these strange times will last is unknown, and the impact of what we have all had to endure is becoming more obvious day by day. In this regard, I think it's fair to say that we are all still living in a phase of business as unusual. And I think this is really going to be the case until we truly become accustomed to living a COVID lifestyle. There's still anxiety and there's still worry about the unknown and what the future will bring, with warnings of a second wave on the way and talk about going back to a nationwide hard lockdown. This is and continues to be an incredibly difficult time for all of us, both professionally and personally. The lines between work and home have now become more blurred than ever, and this may potentially be the start of a new normal in terms of ways of working for a lot of us. This has created new challenges for you, your staff, and their families, so you need to be responsive to these challenges and adapt to how you can best support. As voluntary sector organisations, you'll be very well versed in the concept of safeguarding and the need to protect vulnerable people and beneficiaries from harm. However, as per the brief for today, and as Claire has introduced, in this webinar, we're going to talk about safeguarding and take a different spin on it, a slightly different spin. Today, we will look at some of the emerging risks that charities such as yours need to consider as part of your continued efforts to ensure the safety and well-being of your staff and their families, especially if these new ways of working are likely to continue into the future. I also think that the content that we're going to look at today will be useful for you in your own personal lives too, so hopefully this will be a win-win for everyone. So what we're going to look at, a brief whistle-stop tour of safeguarding, just a nice recap and to act as an introduction to today. We're then going to focus on the emerging safeguarding risks. So we're going to look at school, the workplace, home working, and obviously to end with digital technology and online safety, very relevant for today. But I anticipate that most of you will be familiar with the concept of safeguarding due to your roles within your own organisation. So, as I said, I don't intend or I don't plan to go into this in any more detail. I just really wanted to give a brief intro to, just so that we're all on the same page and to set the scene. So what is safeguarding? Essentially, safeguarding is this: everyone has the right to live in safety, free from abuse and neglect. Safeguarding is the protection of that right for vulnerable people. It's the action that is taken to promote the welfare of vulnerable people and protect them from harm. It's that taking action to ensure the best outcomes for them. So it includes obviously things like preventing harm to them, maltreatment, but also preventing harm to health and development as well, and also the provision of safe and effective care. So all of those things there, they come under that safeguarding umbrella. So who's a vulnerable person? Quite simply, a vulnerable person is either a child or an adult at risk. May also be known as a vulnerable adult, depending on where you are within the UK. So a child, simply put, quite easy, anyone under the age of 18 is classed as a child within the eyes of the law. An adult at risk, more complex, the definition is more complicated because there's more elements to it. So to be defined as an adult at risk, there are 5 criteria that you need to meet. You need to meet all 5 simultaneously. So you need to be an adult, so 18 or older, unless you're in Scotland, where it's actually 16 or older. So you need to be an adult. You need to be in need of care and support services. Now, this is irrespective of whether you're actually receiving them. The point is you need to be in need of those care and support services. And you need to be in need of those care and support services because you are either elderly, or you have a diagnosed mental health condition, learning disability, physical or sensory impairment, or a significant illness. And then because of those issues, you either can't take care of yourself and/or can't protect yourself from any harm. Now, it's really important for me to stress here that the presence of a particular condition does not automatically mean that an adult becomes an adult at risk. So, for example, somebody could be elderly, but be perfectly capable, taking care of themselves, articulating what they want, what their needs are, and be absolutely fine with protecting themselves from any harm or maltreatment. So when you are thinking about whether an adult is a vulnerable adult or an adult at risk, it's really important to understand that all of the elements of that definition need to be met, and you need to take a holistic view of that person's circumstances in order to decide that or not. So what's abuse? Simply put, abuse is the misuse of power and control that one person exerts over another. So when you are considering whether or not abuse or neglect has taken place, intent is irrespective. Intent is not a deciding factor. So it's not about whether somebody intended harm to be caused to somebody. It's more about the fact that abuse did actually occur and that the abuse was significant enough to harm that individual. Abuse also includes not doing. So yes, it's the doing of something horrible, malicious, horrendous to somebody. It also includes the not doing. So this would more kind of be the failure to act, not acting to protect somebody, the failure to act to protect somebody. That also comes under that abuse banner. And hopefully you'll be aware, unfortunately, as we see day by day, month by month, year by year, more examples of where abuse can take place. It can take place anywhere where people are interacting with other people, we can have a potential for abuse. So within the UK, there are 7 defined categories of abuse and neglect. Each is a category in its own right and is very clearly defined. No one category causes another, but when somebody is suffering abuse, very often they will be suffering several categories simultaneously. Now, any form of abuse, like I said, will fit into one of these 7 categories. And I would love to go into these in a bit more detail with you today to kind of give you a bit more context. But as I said, we're just going to do an intro into this today. But there are some extra special areas of concern relating to abuse that the government feels are so concerning within our society that they've actually created separate statutory guidelines in relation to them. But any of these areas of concern, all of those will fit into one of those 7 categories that I've just mentioned. So that is it. That's literally the whistle-stop tour of abuse, the basic principles of safeguarding. Don't worry though, you know, like I said, unfortunately I haven't got time today, but you needn't worry. We do have some resources available for you to go to if you do want to learn more about safeguarding, what it involves, who it involves, how to put the right policies and procedures in place, etc. We've written a few white papers. Again, you can see those on the screen there. Don't worry about taking notes. We're going to create a resources page for you that we can share with you after the webinar, and that will have a list of all the links and references that I talk about throughout today. So that will be nice and user friendly for you. So please don't worry about scribbling down any links or anything like that. So now that we're all on the same page regarding the basic principles of safeguarding and how they apply to vulnerable groups, I want to stretch this further to now demonstrate how important it is to apply these principles to your staff, given the emerging risk that COVID-19 has created and that blurring between home and work. So to figure out where we must go, we need to first look at where we have been. So, schools out. Many of you will be familiar with the famous song by Alice Cooper, School's Out, but instead of being out for summer, we've been out for COVID. And schools play a vital role in safeguarding within our communities. In the old world, kids could be spending more time at school than anywhere else. So schools are really clued up on their responsibilities. Because of their role within society, schools must comply with many statutory guidelines and legislations and obligations and responsibilities, all relating to safeguarding children. Now, at the start of the COVID-19 crisis, many organisations were directed to close, if you remember, if you think back to March, but schools were always an exception to this because they are classed as a critical service. Schools were directed to, where at all possible, remain open to provide education and childcare for vulnerable children and children of key workers. However, unless categorised as a vulnerable child or child of a key worker, most children will have been in full lockdown at home. Now, it's something that I refer to as being locked up in lockdown, and obviously the picture there kind of demonstrates my sentiment there. But this in itself has created safeguarding challenges, all of which, you know, I'll go into in more detail in a moment. But before I do, I just wanted to call out the issue of change fatigue. Honestly, I think most of us feel a sense of fatigue over what we've all had to endure over these past 6 months. However, worryingly, over 70% of school leaders are now reported to be suffering burnout. This is because of the overwhelming churn of measures that they've had to implement within their schools in order to mitigate risk to children. So both during lockdown and now that schools are back. So this brings a whole new meaning to the phrase taught by the fraught, which some of you may have heard before. So teachers must teach our children, a significant task given that most pupils will be at least 3 months behind in their studies. And according to recent research, at least 44% of pupils are going to need intensive catch-up support. And that actually increases to 57% in most deprived areas. But teachers, they don't just teach, they can't just teach. They will also need to care for and nurture our children in the most unprecedented way. What safeguarding risk could emerge due to this? School staff are going to need a lot of support in order to be healthy and resilient enough for them to go forward, so that they are prepared for the immense challenges ahead of them. And I think that's something that we all need to think about. So now it's easy to see how some things in themselves have created safeguarding challenges, but also safeguarding risks have emerged due to the secondary impact of these things. Predominantly the result of school closures combined with the challenges of working, be it from home or actually physically on the site, plus childcare and homeschooling. There's a lot going on there, a lot that we've all had to deal with. So it's really vital to highlight these emerging risks so that you can best safeguard your staff and their families now and going forward. So continuing with the lyrical theme, let's talk about the return to school. So one of the biggest concerns at the forefront of all our minds is the continued safety and well-being of our children who are coming to terms with this strange new world. Now, these may be the kids that you support through your services, or these may even be your own kids, your grandkids, or your nieces and nephews. Either way, the impact on them is very real. Not only have they had to come to terms with being locked up in lockdown, they now have to readjust to going back to school, and school is not the same as what they were used to. They have to socially distance from their friends. They have to adhere to strict formations and bubbles. They have to wear face masks or face coverings. And now hand sanitizer is as important as toothpaste. But then what about the promise of this second wave? We see local lockdowns already being enforced in areas across the UK, as well as a sizable scale back on some of the freedoms that we've recently been afforded, especially this week since Monday. So I think it would be really reckless to disregard the prospect that a UK-wide hard lockdown could happen. So what if it does? What does that mean for school? Now let's talk about the effects of lockdown. Now children are very resilient. Contrary to opinion, children are actually really resilient. But I challenge anyone who would disagree with me when I say that no amount of resilience can prepare our youth for the continued mental, social, physical and developmental stresses of all of this. This is something that has affected them in every way possible. A holistic degradation of self, if you will, something that I refer to as lockdown syndrome. So whatever your role within your organisations or within your own communities, lockdown syndrome is something that we're all going to have to manage and further prepare for. Due to the worries about the ongoing impact of lockdown syndrome, the Children's Commissioner for England and Wales, Anne Longfield, she's warned that children need to be at the heart of any future lockdown decisions, and that schools must be the last to close and the first to open. Schools should only be closed as an absolute last resort after businesses such as pubs, restaurants and other non-essential shops. That being said, many of us fear that we could be thrust into another world, another round of being locked up and locked down, which could again mean no more school. So would this resemble something similar to what we've been used to already, or will it be different? If different, then how different? There is still so much fear and anxiety out there, especially within children. As one child described to me, there is a shared fear among peers that, we may be playing a sinister game of hokey cokey. Schools in, schools out, in, out, shake it all about. You all know the tune, but I think it's really important for you to think about this and think about how this will impact your staff, either professionally or personally. What support will they need, and what could you do to alleviate their stress? Unfortunately, more often than not, vulnerable children will also be those from the most disadvantaged backgrounds and those who will need more support to retain their education. So this has been a particular concern during lockdown because due to school closures, disadvantaged children experience the greatest impact in their progress and development. The gap between the advantaged and the disadvantaged is the greatest it has been in decades. Now, the government has attempted to address some of these issues, and there have been some initiatives. For example, the issuing of digital technology to help disadvantaged children access virtual learning. But despite the efforts over the past month, the gap does not appear to be lessening. Another contributor to lockdown syndrome and an area of concern, particularly for disadvantaged families, is that of food poverty. There has been a lot in the news about the debate surrounding free school dinners and the need to provide food vouchers during lockdown, and it sparked a lot of controversy as the government decided to make a complete U-turn on its decision on this following a campaign by Premier League footballer Marcus Rashford. Now, although on the face of it, this may not seem to be an obvious safeguarding issue, it is actually something that we have been very concerned about for some time. With schools closed, many disadvantaged families have been suffering what's referred to as holiday hunger. So this is where children are at increased risk of going hungry during school closures. So this is because their families may struggle to feed everyone at home, and they cannot rely on the hot meals provided by school during the day. Now, although this was usually a risk associated with the school holidays, as you can imagine, this has been happening over the past 6 months, and the consistent physical and emotional impact on those affected has been what some would call irreversible. In the UK, around 3 million children are at risk of holiday hunger, and this is so much of a concern that for the first time, the charity UNICEF, who are responsible for providing humanitarian aid to children all around the globe, they've launched their first ever domestic emergency response to tackle child food poverty right here in the UK because of the pandemic. So this is something that, you know, may impact your staff and their families. Is this something that you need to be aware of? Is this something that you need to think about through the services you provide? Now, I've already mentioned how schools play such an important role in safeguarding within our communities. One of the greatest concerns for the safeguarding industry right now is the issue of hidden harm. So this is because safeguarding concerns that would usually have been highlighted and monitored by school were going unnoticed during lockdown, leading to an increase in child abuse behind closed doors. Essentially, children were not being seen. The reduction in other types of activities that children would usually have participated in has also contributed to this. So, for example, extracurricular activities or medical appointments which have been cancelled or reprioritised. Now, the children's charity, the NSPCC, they have some quite startling figures on this. During lockdown, 22% more children had contacted Childline about physical abuse, and 53% more adults had reported concerns about a child experiencing physical abuse. Now, as lockdown restrictions have eased and children have returned to the classroom, children will once again now be seen. And the knock-on effect of this is that there will be a soar in child protection cases being reported by schools, and this could increase by as much as 250%. The impact of this could be detrimental to the ability to function for vital services such as social care and police. Families who were already being supported by these services during lockdown could suffer if referral rates soar. Now, in the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, we needed to protect the NHS from getting so overwhelmed that it could collapse. Now, potentially, we need to move that focus to children's social care, because if the system gets too overwhelmed, it may break. And what then? Will this impact your staff? You need to think. Will this impact your organisation? How will you respond to these challenges here? And what can you do to best prepare for the knock-on effects? Now, you also need to be mindful that some of your staff may be dealing with the exacerbated effects of lockdown syndrome in their children, in that they can't attend school due to COVID-related anxiety. The mental health implications of being locked up and locked down are becoming more widely reported, and without doubt this has been something that all of you will be familiar with. And I'll mention a bit more about mental health in a moment, but on this particular topic there's been controversy relating to the government's approach to impose fines on families who don't send their children back to school because of this, because their children are not yet emotionally ready to go back. Now, child psychiatrists are really worried about the impact on children's mental health if parents are forced to send their children to school when they're suffering from anxiety. More than 250 child and adolescent psychiatrists have combined forces to fight this. So this is a matter that your staff may be faced with. Will you need to consider how you can best support them in or out of work with this? This will no doubt create childcare challenges too, especially if they need to work on site. So how can you best support your staff and help to alleviate the burden that many will be faced with on this? And actually related to this, the Public Health Agency in Northern Ireland recently published a blog called "When Will This Be Over?" When will it be over? This is probably a question that many parents and carers around the globe are being asked regularly. So how do we respond? Now, this resource What it does is it helps to tackle some of those challenges. So it discusses ways to keep conversations with children about coronavirus healthy and honest. Now, although the blog does focus on Northern Ireland, actually the guidance and advice in there is universal. So perhaps this is a resource that you could share with your staff, for example. And what we'll do is we'll stick the link to this in the resources page that you're going to get, so you can have a look yourselves. So let's talk about COVID-19 related harassment in the workplace. So expert legal firms such as our own panel solicitors, Waitmans, they're warning of the rise in staff being harassed in the workplace, in particular those from a BAME background. The warning comes as there's a growing trend where staff are being bullied and harassed in the workplace because they are perceived to be at greater risk of having the virus due to their ethnic background. Social stigma in relation to health is the negative association between a person or group who shares certain characteristics and specific diseases. Now, in the current climate, people are being stereotyped and discriminated against because of a perceived link with COVID-19, and organisations such as yours are being urged to really be tough on this. So this is especially so because abuse due to a person's protected characteristics such as race may also be a hate crime and will therefore be a criminal matter as well as a civil one. So you need to consider, is your organisation prepared for this? How will you recognise this? What is your response strategy? This is abuse, so how will you safeguard those affected, and how will you liaise with other organisations like the police, for example? Now, these are all things that you're going to have to think about, and I'm going to help you out here. I'm going to share a couple of links on this. The first is to the legal briefing by Waitmans, and the second link will actually be advice from the Metropolitan Police on what is hate crime. So with the easing of so many restrictions, the return on site for work is a reality, and many more are considering the move to this in the not so distant future. Even though the schools have reopened, the issue of COVID-related childcare may still be a very real challenge for many, and this might be perhaps due to a phased or intermittent return to school, half school days, reduced after school clubs, or even less support by early years provisions such as nursery or childminding. Now, the childcare sector in particular actually has taken a real hit as a result of the pandemic, and experts are warning that it may actually be on the brink of collapse. The early years provision, the early years workforce, they play a crucial role within our communities. They ensure that the country continues to function by providing vital childcare services for working parents and carers. But more importantly, they are fundamental in supporting children's health and social development in what is a key developmental period. And that's something which we're most in need of today, most in need of. So perhaps your staff's usual go-to for childcare support may not be an option. Is it therefore important that you are sensitive to this? Absolutely. Be sensitive to this, and wherever you can, be as flexible as possible to safely support your staff with this challenge. If working from home is still an option, please use it. Ultimately though, children's safety is paramount. For employees in particular, so your paid staff, you should be considering how you can adapt their working arrangements to support them in keeping their children safe. Fundamentally, an employee's priority must be to the needs of their children or other dependents. Therefore, if it is not possible for employees to keep their child safe whilst they come into work, it may be very likely that that employee may need to take time off to look after their dependents. Now, employees are entitled to time off for this reason in the event of an emergency or an unexpected event. So this could apply to situations relating to coronavirus, and this is even if they're working from home. So I would recommend that you review your processes to consider how you will respond to this situation. But regardless of who you are or what service you provide, the issue of childcare will be a big deal. Many of you will be thinking of other, more innovative ways to support your staff with this problem, especially where more and more of us are now returning physically on site. Some of you may be considering allowing your staff's children into the workplace to alleviate their childcare burdens. After all, these are unprecedented times which call for unprecedented actions. However, to put it simply, this is a really, really bad idea unless you already have an established childcare facility on site. So that would be an Ofsted registered on-site creche or nursery. Unless you have that already, this is not a viable option for you. Okay, so at this point you may be thinking, right, well, we don't currently have an on-site creche established, but we could set one up. Maybe we could ask some staff members to babysit their colleagues' kids in the workplace, or maybe we could employ an Ofsted registered childminder to come into the workplace and look after children. The answer here is also no. Do not consider this under any circumstances. With regard to childminders specifically, they are not allowed to work on commercial premises, otherwise they'll be in violation of their Ofsted registration. So that wouldn't even be a scenario that you could use anyway. But any form of childcare requires certain checks and balances to ensure the safety and welfare of not only the children but the adults too. There are numerous regulations and governing and monitoring systems that are required to ensure children are safeguarded from harm within these types of environments. Now, these are legal statutory responsibilities that are required by law. They are there for a reason. If you are an organisation that doesn't usually have any cause to consider childcare, you may be unfamiliar with these checks and balances, and so therefore you'll be creating a safeguarding risk that you had not foreseen or anticipated, perhaps due to your inexperience in this complex area. You will increase the risk of child abuse, and you will also expose yourself to a detrimental liability. Even allowing for these extraordinary times, if something was to happen to a child who had been brought into work to be minded, even in an informal capacity, or to sit beside their parents whilst their parent went about their work, the organisation, so you, would be looking at an uphill battle to defend any claims. There could be criminal implications as well as civil ones. In the face of any challenge, civil challenge, for example, you'll need to be able to satisfy a court that you took such care as was reasonably required in all the circumstances. This will be a highly onerous burden of proof for discharge. So, if your organisation can still facilitate your staff to work from home, you should really do so. This does to some degree minimise the burden of childcare that many staff members may be facing over these times of insecurity. Nonetheless, the challenge will still exist. It will still be there. Some of your staff may need to continue with homeschooling in some way, perhaps due to their kids' age, or maybe to plug the gaps in reduced or intermittent school days. Extended time at home has most definitely contributed to lockdown syndrome. With schools closed for 6 months, children have, for various reasons, been spending an exorbitant amount of time online. How have your staff been able to cope with this? How have they been able to keep their children entertained safely, and are they still able to do so? This is something that I'll come on to in a minute, but before I do, I wanted to talk through some examples of some extra special areas of concern that you could be thinking about, that I would urge you to start thinking about during this time. So these are most definitely major contributing factors to lockdown syndrome for all of us, I might add, not just the kids. So you need to be thinking about how you can best support your staff in these challenging times with these circumstances. Now, I'm sure we can all say with complete honesty that being cramped up indoors can lead to many tensions within the home. However, the impact of being locked up in lockdown has led to a stark increase in the numbers of domestic abuse cases. These have been so concerning that the government has decided to intervene. Statistically, 1 in 3 people suffer domestic abuse anyway. It can be a taboo topic, and there are many misconceptions relating to it. Often people assume it's an issue that affects a certain gender or background. This is not true. Domestic abuse can take many forms, and anyone can suffer it regardless of their age, their gender, background or social status. Now, according to recent figures, since lockdown started, the Men's Advice Line has reported a 35% rise in calls relating to men specifically suffering domestic abuse. And the National Domestic Abuse Helpline has reported a 49% rise in calls generally. For many, this will be an unspoken burden that they must endure, which more often than not will be happening in secret behind closed doors. It will therefore be highly unlikely that you will be aware if a member of your staff is suffering domestic abuse. However, if you are causing your staff to work from home, this should be a serious consideration as part of your continuing efforts to ensure their safety and well-being. If children live within a home where domestic abuse is a factor, this is classed as child abuse and it will be a safeguarding matter. Now, within the first 3 weeks of lockdown, 16 people, including children, were killed by domestic abuse. And as completely devastating as this is, this figure has without doubt increased as lockdown has continued. So you really do need to be checking in with your staff, asking if they're able to keep themselves and their children safe at home. You need to be mindful of this risk, and you need to revisit your risk assessments to incorporate this. But due to the secretive nature of domestic abuse, it may be that they won't feel comfortable to disclose this to you. So it can be really difficult for you to identify and manage. So I would say seek some guidance on this if you don't feel comfortable or confident in your approach. I'm going to help you out with this. So I'm going to share a link within our resources page to an organisation called Safe Lives. Now they support victims and survivors of domestic abuse, and they've created some specific guidance on how organisations can support their staff at home. So I'm sure you'll find that really informative. But irrespective of whatever the current restrictions are, if a person needs to flee due to domestic abuse, they are absolutely allowed to do so with full government support. Related to violence within the home, we've also seen a significant increase of child and adolescent on parent violence during lockdown. According to recent research conducted by Manchester and Oxford universities, the number of child and adolescent to parent violence increased by 70% when locked up in lockdown. Now, more than 2/3 of professionals have confirmed that they are aware of more episodes as the support network around families disintegrated over the last 6 months. And I'll share a link to that research by those two universities with you in the resources page so you can have more of a look. And then, as we all are having to adjust with living with COVID-19, the negative effects of us all having to deal with this are starting to become very apparent. Fear and anxiety, combined with the effects of self-isolation and limited contact with friends and loved ones, has all contributed to lockdown syndrome. The effect of this on all of us, on our mental health, has been incomprehensible. Be it child or adult, this environment has led to an exacerbation of pre-existing mental health concerns, and in the case of children especially, new and increased illnesses related to COVID-19 existential despair. That's an actual new mental health condition. This links into that holistic degradation that I described before and includes the COVID-related anxieties that I mentioned, that many young people are suffering. To give you an idea about what I mean by this, I wanted to share some statistics with you. The Office of National Statistics reports that over 50% of young people between the ages of 16 to 24 are more likely to suffer the negative implications of lockdown-related loneliness. And loneliness, as we all know, can have a detrimental effect on our well-being. The Children's Society, they report on the specific anxieties regarding the impact of COVID-19 on adolescents, so young people aged 10 to 17. Now, a young person's emotional health and well-being can be especially fragile throughout these adolescent years, and this is because of the normal process of development. But we are being warned that the effects of the pandemic will most likely impair adolescent development and cause a high degree of stress and potential harm to many young people within our population. And then what about child suicide? Suicide rates in young people are increasing, and according to data on this, we can confirm that this has been accelerated due to lockdown. And then the National Children's Bureau highlights the COVID-19 mental health implications for children under 5. So children of this age are less likely to be able to articulate their feelings and so can be at increased risk due to this. And finally, the children's charity Barnardo's, they've warned that we're rapidly moving from a mental health crisis to an all-out catastrophe. According to their latest research, it's been identified that 88% of children are suffering with worsening diagnosable mental illnesses due to COVID-19. So quite a lot to think about there. Now, it really isn't my intention to scaremonger or cause you distress, but I'm sure you'll all join me in flipping out just a little bit about all this and what this means for the future. How will we move forward? How will we respond to all of this as a society, as our communities? It's something that we're all going to have to get on board with. And then, there may be other more contextual safeguarding risks that may not be so obvious. And there's quite a few, but I just wanted to focus on county lines in particular. You may have seen in the news over the past couple of days, actually, there's been a big drive by the the Home Secretary to kind of really clamp down on this, and it's because of this reason, it's because of COVID-19. And I want to talk about county lines because it's quite a complex area, and I think it's an area that not a lot of people truly understand. To be honest, I could do a whole nother webinar on it in its own, but I just wanted to talk about this for a little bit, if I may. Essentially, county lines is the name given to the network of serious and organised crime gangs who deal drugs. So they transport the drugs from one area to another, often across local authority or police boundaries. Now, the business model, if you can even refer to it as that, it's specifically reliant on the exploitation and the trafficking of vulnerable people, so be it child or adult at risk. Now, the gangs use these people because they're most likely to be what we call clean skins. So they're less likely to be known to authorities, known to police, and so then they can deal drugs under the radar without detection. Now, we know that children as young as 7 are recruited for this purpose, and there are at least 1,200 county lines gangs in operation across the UK, 11% of whom have immediate access to firearms, and 45% of whom are considered to be serious violent offenders. So this is a growing concern within our communities, and it is not something that we can just police our way out of. Authorities, including the police, but also social services and in particular housing, are expressing feeling really overwhelmed by their reduced ability to manage this risk. It's so systemic within our communities that it's being likened to the Japanese knotweed of society. Fundamentally, these organised crime gangs are extremely savvy and they intertwine themselves within every aspect of our communities. According to the experts in the crime and justice space, county lines gangs have quickly responded to the COVID-19 pandemic, and they've actually used this situation to their advantage. They've modified their recruitment tactics and their operating models to successfully largely adapt to the COVID-19 lockdown situation. So potentially, there is something that big businesses could learn from them. Who knew? But moving on from this, going into a different realm now, talking about digital technology and online safety. Now, I briefly mentioned before how to keep children safely entertained at home. According to research that we've recently commissioned in partnership with the online safety experts Phoenix Safeguarding Group, we've identified that 1 in 10 children feel that as a result of lockdown, they now feel completely free to do absolutely whatever they want to do online, completely free to do whatever. And I think it's safe to say that we have and are still using far more digital technology now. Over the past 6 months, this has been essential to see out lockdown, but there are considerable safeguarding risks associated with this, and you do need to be aware of them. Many of you may be aware of the increased correlation between young people's mental health and their social media use. Prior to lockdown, screen time was an issue that many families really battled with. However, now this seems to be the means to an end. Many of us have turned to social media and live streaming platforms to help us with work and social connections. With this increase, though, comes heightened safeguarding risks associated with online harm, specifically with regard to live streaming. Now, the most popular live streaming platforms for kids are Instagram Live, Facebook Live, YouTube and Twitch, some which hopefully most of you have heard about, but also other platforms such as House Party and Zoom are also being utilised too. Live streaming, which involves broadcasting live video over the internet, is one of the riskiest activities. It's particularly so for kids because of the live broadcast aspect, and kids as young as 7 are doing this. So kids as young as 7 are really getting involved in quite a lot, but it's really risky for children because it's public. It can expose children to inappropriate content, and it's extremely difficult to moderate, if not impossible. So children are also more likely to make bad decisions whilst live streaming, and that's because of the pressure of being in the moment. So this could include sharing sensitive information about themselves or other family members, or sharing risque pictures or videos of themselves potentially. Now, we know that 1 in 5 kids who live stream admit to speaking to a stranger online, and 1 in 10 have shared their mobile number with a stranger whilst live streaming. And since lockdown started, we estimate that 1.4 million more children within the UK are live streaming. However, live streaming, it doesn't just pose a risk to kids. Many adults are using it for formal reasons, perhaps to facilitate virtual training or work meetings. Exactly what we're doing here right now. We're using live streaming for this webinar, and I'm talking to you from my home. But you do need to be aware of all the risks associated with this activity, especially if you are causing your staff to work virtually from home. You need to safeguard your staff from online harm and ensure they understand the risks and their responsibilities too. Not doing this will leave you and your staff vulnerable. You may have heard of some absolute shocking horror stories about work meetings getting hacked and participants being targeted for abuse. Now Zoom, I'll use them as an example because they've been in the media. They've been at the centre of controversy around this, and you may have heard of the term Zoom bombing. So this is where a Zoom meeting is hacked and images or videos of child sexual abuse is uploaded for all to see. Now the effect on people who see this material, be it adult or child, is absolutely traumatic. So I'm going to share some stats with you on this while we're on the topic. So according to the Metropolitan Police, we know that the number of suspected incidents of online child sexual abuse has increased by 700% since 2014. Between 2016 and 2017, police forces in England and Wales reported just over 5,500 incidents of child sexual abuse, and all of them had an online element. And according to the NSPCC, it takes less than 45 minutes to groom a child online. But unfortunately, it doesn't just end there. On the digital technology front, I also wanted to highlight the increased risk associated with online gaming, in particular the links to gambling activities for vulnerable people, and this can have potential long-term, lifelong consequences for them. So with children spending more time bored at home, and as parents continue to balance working and the unsupervised increased screen time, plus massive advances in immersive technology, it's all created this perfect storm, meaning many more children will pick up the habit of gambling whilst gaming. Now, many parents, carers or supervisors may not even realise the link to this, or even know that children can actually gamble whilst they're gaming. As technology has moved far beyond legislation, child gambling in this context is currently not illegal. So there's really not a lot that can be done to prevent it. So children can only be safeguarded from the risks. Many charities, like yours, and many mental health services are experiencing this problem firsthand. And the NHS, they've now opened their first gambling clinics for addicts aged 13 to 25. So this really is something that you need to be aware of. If this doesn't impact you directly through the services you're providing, it will almost certainly be an issue that may impact your staff, in their own personal lives at home. And there is a part you can play in raising awareness on this. I'll share a link to a resource in this and our resources page, and it's actually an article that I wrote on this issue in our News and Views publication, so we'll share the link to that so you can read that in a bit more detail. But as you can see, these are incredibly worrying figures which highlight the need to ensure online safety. And now that I've completely scared you all half to death, you'll want to know, well, how can we improve online safety? Now, I mentioned before that the content from today's webinar will be useful for you, not only in your professional lives, but also in your personal lives too. So hopefully the guidance I'm about to give you will help from this perspective. So I'm going to kind of tailor it accordingly. So there are some simple steps that you can do to help minimise risk of online harm. So number one, make your home safer. Ensure you're using the best safety settings provided by your internet service provider. And excuse the pun here, lock down your router. Number two, make your devices safer. Have the most appropriate safety settings enabled for all the devices within the home. Number three, with your kids, just get to know what apps they're using. Simply talk to them. This is so important. Don't start by asking, have you tried this? That could come across as really accusatory for a teen or a young person. So instead, approach it by asking, have you heard about this cool new app such and such? That will sound more inquisitive, and it will allow them to show off their knowledge, which all children love to do. And then you can use this engagement to have a conversation about staying safe online and working together to apply safety settings. Now, we're all familiar with the concept of stranger danger in the offline world, but it is still very relevant in the online world too, so try and reinforce those messages as well. But at the end of the day, talking is the most important tool you have. Talk, talk, talk. Let them know we all make mistakes. In fact, reinforce that if they feel they can't actually speak to you or anyone else, they can always seek support from other sources of support, such as NSPCC. You know, they run the service Childline, and actually kids don't just have to phone them up, they can access support from them online as well. But if you do have concerns about social media, apps or live streaming in general, you know, before talking to your kids, before talking to them about these things, do your homework, research the issue yourself so that you do have at least the basic knowledge. Now, I'm ahead of you here. I hear you saying, well, that's easier said than done. And I do completely appreciate that there is just so much to consider when dealing with online safety. The internet is full of so much conflicting advice, the parents, carers, supervisors. You know, you can all feel really daunted and overwhelmed about where to go for advice. So I would say go to a trusted source such as Unique. You know, this is their area of expertise, and they often provide consultation and support and guidance and advice on all sorts of elements of digital safeguarding to not just the government, but also many high-profile charities and NGOs within the sector. So Unique has really useful, credible and relevant advice for parents and professionals relating to all of the issues I've just discussed. And actually, you can get this info by accessing a joint website that we set up. It's there on the screen, www.oursafetycentre.co.uk. Again, don't worry, we'll share this with you in the resources page. But this website's been created in partnership with them. This will give you, some helpful instructions on anything from how to enable the best safety settings to a greater understanding of the digital space and emerging trends and risks. So I'm absolutely 100% certain that you will find something helpful in there. That's us finished. Now, I appreciate that there has been just so much to think about and to digest. We're always here to provide support and guidance. So if there is any aspect of what we've looked at today that you want more info on, just please get in touch. But let's move over to some questions and some answers.
Thank you for that, Marie. I will now begin the question and answer session. Any questions we do not get to in the time we have left today will be answered and sent out to you in a follow-up in due course. So, Marie, I'm going to ask the first question, which is been quite popular in the Q&A. The BBC article yesterday suggested that due to lockdown, there are less safeguarding referrals as people who are abused are hidden from sight. This seems to reflect our experience. Within my organisation, we noticed that when working online, it is more difficult to spot signs of abuse. Do you have any advice on what could be done within online delivery of services to combat this?
Hi, Janine, thanks for that. I think for this, obviously it's very difficult for everybody. These are just the most ridiculous times that we're living in, to be honest. And I think it's wise, and definitely something that I would suggest and urge you to do, is actually to speak to your local authority, your children's services who are responsible for your area, because obviously different local authorities have different ways of responding. They will have their own niches. So what I would suggest is reach out to them, speak to them about this, get their advice, because there will be specific ways in which they'll prefer you to respond, and obviously they'll be having these same challenges as well. So be succinct, consider those challenges that overridingly I explained just a minute ago, and have an open dialogue with them. What can you do to help them out? How would they prefer you to respond? What advice would they give you to virtually respond to this challenge, and to identify as much as you can. We're all in it together, so we just need to have an open dialogue. What can we do to support you? What can you do to support us? And really take it from there. I think that's probably the best advice.
Thanks, Marie. Okay, so on to the next question. Is there any guidance about the safety of virtual recruitment, whether employees or volunteers? Is the safeguarding risk increased if all recruitment procedures are undertaken remotely?
Yes, this is a good one. Thank you, whoever posted that. Yes, I think in the main it is slightly increased, but I think we need to kind of unpick that a bit. Actually, recruitment processes, safe recruitment processes, most of them can actually be done virtually anyway. If you think back to what you're doing anyway, you know, you're sending out an application form, which is obviously a virtual process. You're getting references, which is a virtual process. So I think it's just about remembering that you do utilise virtual means anyway, but also thinking about, you know, what other mediums are available to you at this time. So scrutinise whatever's being done virtually. You know, use the telephone. You know, if you're getting a reference through, you want to scrutinise that and then scrutinise the scrutiny. So you get a reference, you need to clarify, you know, who it's from, and then I would just follow up with a telephone call, or maybe set up a virtual meeting, you know, a Teams call or something that's live, you know, that live streaming that I just mentioned, so that you can see who you're talking to. And I think that applies as well for the person that you're recruiting. You'll want to, as much as you can, try and justify that they are who they are and they are who they're saying they are. So, you know, utilise, you know, Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever it is that you prefer to use. Utilise that as much as you can, because actually, I think the main risk is that you are not physically seeing someone, but you could virtually see someone and then scrutinise that. Hopefully that makes sense.
Thanks, Marie. Okay, so on to the next question. Is there any research or statistics articles on increased harassment of BAME staff and volunteers?
Okay, so I mentioned when I was talking about harassment due to COVID-19 in the workplace, that actually the main content from that is from a legal briefing that was sort of published by Wakeman Solicitors, and I think many of you will know them. They're specialists in this area. So we're going to share the link to that briefing with you in the resources page that I've referenced throughout today. So in there it does go into a lot more details. It's got statistics and things like that, and also signposts you to various other places that you can get the specific advice that you're looking for. And if that, I mean, it's very informative, the briefing. I've read it myself. So you know, if there isn't something in there that you know quite answers your specific question, there is a link in there to actually go to them and ask them, and they are really receptive. They always love to hear, you know, from all of us who are having these challenges. So there is an option to reach out and ask a specific question that you might have, which is really helpful.
Great, thanks, Marie. So we have another question. Do we have any preliminary information as yet about the extent to which the possible anticipated impacts of the pandemic have happened in terms of closure of VCS organisations, loss of staff or volunteers, and a surge in lockdown safeguarding referrals to statutory services?
So statistics-wise, there's a lot of statistics out there. I did cover some of this in the webinar early on in terms of hidden harm and you know, the increase of about 200% odd. So yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think the question answered first kind of links into this. Yes, you guys are really feeling the pinch. You know, you've got some reduced funding because of everything. You know, the services that you're providing are vital to the pandemic response, and potentially it's services that people may not initially consider to be vital, but they are vital nonetheless. You know, you're providing some exceptional services, and you need to continue to do that because you're the people that help support society. So without doubt, yes, you know, the loss of funding, the loss of employees or volunteers, you know, maybe being furloughed, or you may have to make redundancies, whatever it may be. So I think it's about going and checking your processes and just having, I can't stress it enough, just having that open dialogue with your children's services or your adult services, because they will be wanting to lean on you like you know, they should and would. So I think it's really important to have that open dialogue with your liaison there, and just talk together about how best you can both respond and you know, how best you can help each other out. I mean, that's absolutely the key piece of advice that I would have, and they would welcome that. They would welcome you having that open dialogue. You know, I come from a social services background, and absolutely, you know, if it was me, and I know it's, you know, many of my peers within that industry would absolutely welcome that. It's so vital. So hopefully I've helped a little bit with that question.
Thanks, Marie. Okay, I'm just going to ask one more question, as that's all we've got time for. But as I mentioned, we will be following up with a document which answers all the questions that we've had through today. So we'll send that through in due course. So the last question is, what are your recommendations for online volunteering projects, i.e. tutoring children or befriending adults at risk?
Yes, so I could recommend all of them really. You know, you guys know, you know, your services inside out. You know what you do. You know how important they are within the communities that you work in. So you'll be really clued up in terms of, you know, your target audience, for want of a better word, if we're talking virtually. So, you know, I'm not here to sort of teach you all to suck eggs. I wouldn't dare. So my advice is to think, you know the people that you support, maybe seek some feedback from them on how they would best like you to support during this period. There's been so much out there in terms of, you know, organisations that support children and actually asking children for their views. Believe it or not, people do like to give feedback, and they do like to have some say, have some input into how they want you to respond and how they want you to help. So in this time in particular, it is really important to have that liaison. So seek some feedback from your beneficiaries, your service users, the people that you support. And you know, technology today, I've just been talking about a whole section on it, but it's so advanced today that actually, you know, there are so many different ways that you can reach the people that you need to reach through the services that you provide. And if you're stuck, I mentioned Unique, who we partner with, but they are online safeguarding experts in this area. Again, you know, we work in partnership with them. We have a really good relationship. If you're stuck or you're not sure how to best you know, go forward with this, just reach out. You know, we can give some advice with your, you know, particular situation, give you some things to think about. So so hopefully that's answered that question.
Thank you, Marie. I've also seen a few questions on the webinar focusing a bit more on children and staff than adults. We are sending out a feedback form, so if there are particular topics you'd like to hear about in the future, please do let us know on there, as safeguarding is a huge topic, and an hour isn't really that long to go through all the different things that Marie can cover. So Marie, I don't know whether you've got any comments on that.
Yeah, Janine, I have. Essentially, safeguarding children or safeguarding adults at risk, the principles are universal. They're the same principles. So yes, we talk about safeguarding children because our society, you know, that's the way we're geared up, and actually the goalposts for safeguarding children are a lot more rigid, and everybody kind of knows, you know, what you must do, what you must do, what you mustn't do. My advice is always think about your processes and your arrangements and all the things you need to consider for children, and just completely mirror that with adults. You know, adults at risk, children, they're both vulnerable groups. They both need to be safeguarded under the same basic principles. Yes, legislation is different. Yes, the way that statutory organisations respond is slightly different, but actually the principles are the same. So all the advice from today, I appreciate it's been very child focused, but you know, advice like, for example, with the digital technology, that would be relevant for your adults at risk as well. So and all the other sort of areas as well. So, you know, dependents at home, you haven't just got children, some of you may have adult dependents as well for different reasons. So I would just say, you know, that the kind of best case scenarios to deal with are the advice for children, but absolutely the principles are the same for adults, and And I think it's just about recognising that.
Great, thanks Marie. So I'm now going to hand over to Claire Legg from NCVO, who's just going to close the webinar for us. Over to you, Claire.
Thanks, Janine. So thanks, Marie, for answering all of those questions and for sharing all of your expertise with us today. Thank you everybody who's joined us for the webinar. We hope you found it useful. As we've mentioned, if we didn't get around to answering your questions, don't worry, we will send around a Q&A document in the follow-up email. We'll also send a recording of the webinar and some other relevant resources, as well as a link to a feedback survey, and we'd really appreciate your feedback if you do have a bit of time to complete this. So thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you at one of our future webinars. Goodbye.